We are right. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back, folks. This is the WP-Tonic Roundtable Show. This is episode 280. Yes, the episodes are flying. We've got a really great panel here. Got some great news stories as well. And I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves. I'm sure some people will already arrive late and join us, hopefully, as well. And I'm going to let my friend John Locke introduce himself first. Off you go, John.
Sweet. My name's John Locke. My business is Lockdown Design. We do SEO for manufacturing firms. There you go.
They are great. And we got Chris Badgett. Would you like to introduce yourself, Chris?
My name's Chris Badgett. I focus on online courses and membership sites and have a product in that space called Lifter LMS, and also have a podcast on that topic called LMS Cast.
You look very comfortable this week, actually, Chris.
My wife's away, so I'm taking over the house.
Oh, sweet. And we've got the great Morten joining us as well. Would you like to introduce yourself, Morten?
Hello, I'm Morten Rand-hendriksen. I'm a senior staff instructor with LinkedIn Learning and lynda.com. And today I'm here speaking about philosophy.
Yes. You're at the right show, folks. This is mostly about WordPress and stuff on the web. But let's get straight into the stories then, because I know Morten's got a hard deadline. Using ethics in web design, a smashing magazine article by a guy, a friend I know, a guy called Morten. Would you like to, if it's possible, Morten, give a quick synopsis of why you wrote this article and maybe the main overhanging theme of the article?
Sure. If you've been paying attention to conversations on the web and in tech in general for the past couple of years, there's been a lot of focus on this concept of ethics in our work. This stems from a bunch of events that have transpired over the past couple of years, like major leaks of data and companies selling information to political organizations and very problematic behavior within companies around women and people of color and minorities. And there's just this endless barrage of very problematic situations that have occurred. And people are starting to look at what are the causes for this. And it seems pretty apparent that one of the causes is a lot of the tech space is driven by businesses who started in a garage or in some sort of dorm room or something like that, and they never established a proper foundation of ethics. They were more just building things around move fast and break things, and it appears that a lot of these move fast and break things, we've ended up breaking society and breaking people. So there's a ton of conversations around ethics in tech space. And a lot of those conversations come from the perspective of ethics is this new thing that we've just discovered and this is what it looks like. And then there's a bunch of presentations of things like a code of ethics for design or a Hippocratic oath for data scientists and things like that. And like Jonathan, my background is in philosophy, and when people use
I'm a lad from Essex, mate. I went to crappy comprehensive. There was no philosophy. It's just self-taught, basically.
Yeah, but you have some philosophy background. So I, a couple of years ago, I decided that I would come into this conversation and shed some light on how the practice of ethics as a science can be used to further the tech space. And I started writing an article. That took me 2 years to write because it's very, very complicated. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons it's complicated is when we talk about ethics, we pick a moral philosophy and then we follow that train of thought. So for instance, in the tech space, the normal thing you see a lot of is consequentialism, something like the 80-20 rule, like you do things that benefit the majority and then to hell with the minority, or things like that. That's the most common type of business practice we have, and that is in text-based too. So often when you see argumentation around things like features in WordPress or somewhere else, that is the general rule, is like whatever benefits the majority is what goes, even if it disadvantages some people. In addition, we have a lot of these codes of ethics, which are lists of, a designer should be a person that does this and this and this, and that's virtue ethics. And those things are fine. The problem with them is they're hard to measure. So what I did was look at 4 different branches of moral philosophy and say, what if we, instead of picking a branch of moral philosophy, made a chain? Or we say we run through a set of different ones that each fix each other's problems to create a cohesive platform of ethics.
Only slightly ambitious then, Morten.
Yeah, a little bit. And then we build methodology around this so that when decisions are being made in the text space, we can anchor those decisions in a firm ethical foundation. So what the theories I put together are consequentialism, which is what's best for the most people, deontology or duty ethics, which is what people may have heard about the Kant's categorical imperative, which is this idea that you act as if the act that you perform should be the act that any other person in the same situation should perform as well. Then we have virtue ethics, which is you behave in accordance with the type of person you want to become. And then finally, we have something called capability approach, which is rarely talked about in our community and also rarely talked about in philosophy, to be quite honest, which is the newest branch on the moral philosophy tree, which shifts the judgment of the ethics of an action from the actor or from the act onto the person acted upon, to say, when you perform an act, what capabilities are you granting the person acted upon so that they can better their lives? And if you take these philosophies and make a chain out of them, so it's kind of like a bridge with 4 piers, then you can say, when you're making a new decision, you always start with the capability approach, and you say, what kind of capabilities am I granting the end user of this product or this decision by doing this, and how can that person take that capability to enhance their lives in some way? Then you go on to virtue ethics and say, do I become the kind of person I want to be by doing this? So do I build myself as the professional I want to be by making this decision? And am I comfortable with that type of person? Then you go to duty ethics and say, in doing this, I am establishing a de facto norm for this. And is this a norm? So do I want every other person in the same situation to do the same thing? And am I upholding my duties of care to the person I'm acting upon, to the thing I'm building, to my client, to myself, and everything else? And then finally, you go to consequentialism and say, what are the outcomes of what I'm doing here? Have I accounted for all the outcomes? Am I making sure that the people who are disadvantaged by these decisions are being handled in a proper way so that I don't create some sort of schism between those who get benefits and those who don't? And when you string all that together, you'll have a much deeper conversation about your decisions and what you are creating. Now, that's not to say this methodology produces a list of do's and don'ts in tech. And that's not the purpose of it. That's not the purpose of ethics either. The purpose of ethics is to say, to have a methodology in place, to have discussions around whether an act is something you should perform or not. So it's not a mandated list of things you must follow. It's a list of discussion points you need to address before you continue. So you have actually thought through these elements before you roll out a product or make a decision.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think we probably lost about half the audience, but there we go. It's a complicated subject. I think you're really brave to do this, and also I think it's rather important because people have a tendency to think, that they have no philosophy and no ethics. but they do. It's just a vacuum, isn't it? You know, if you allow a vacuum, it's going to be filled with something. What did you think of this, Chris?
I thought it was a great article. I actually have a background in philosophy myself too. And to go deep into...
Yes, that's right, folks. It's this week.
To go deep into this issue, I think is really admirable. And I hear you that it took 2 years to write and kind of put it all together. I think in the tech space, it can be very myopic sometimes in terms of ethics. Let's say an engineer, founding team or whatever, you know, they're going after monthly recurring revenue, build fast, break things, try not to die. They're not necessarily asking the big questions. So I find this helpful, and I'll just share because I think to take what Morten was just talking about and apply it. These are some of the issues that we look at Lifter LMS. So for capability, what world or future are you building for the end user? We're trying to empower people to learn. We're trying to empower experts and entrepreneurs to be able to build careers, businesses, and impact in a world where the traditional systems don't always work out well for people, both from a learning and a teaching perspective. That's a big part of why we do what we do and informs how we make decisions. What kind of person do we want to become in the process? When we look at our tech, we just want to empower people. So that involves listening to them, talking to them, you know, serving people who have a message to share, a skill to share, to develop other people. It like sends out a ripple. And being a generating force behind that ripple is something that we value. And then the norms and expectations. This is a really interesting one because when you're building, especially in the e-commerce space, it's really easy to get really focused on like the conversion and the checkout and, you know, maximizing revenue for the person building the site. But there's so many other norms that are important besides making money with a website. So when we design tools, it's not just focusing on helping people sell the most amount of courses and membership sites possible. There's a lot of other things like empowering their students, opening up feedback loops for communication. All these other norms are really important to us when we design. And then the consequentialism, I think, is really great. And I can admit that we're not the best at this. I remember yesterday making the comment like, well, 80% of our people need this, so we should focus on this. And it does happen. I get the question a lot myself. How does Lifter LMS work with accessibility? I'm like, we're not there. We haven't focused on it. Like I'm kind of flying blind. I know I need to focus on that. But I think that's a really interesting topic in terms of neglecting the minority and however you define that. Well, sometimes it's not the best idea.
I know a good expert on that. He's actually on this panel, so you might be. Before I throw it, we're to recap. We're talking about Morten's article once again about ethics and the web. 2 words: ethics and web. That don't seem to have a lot of linkage at the present moment. Before I throw it over to John to see what his thoughts about this, I just want to say my own personal stance. The reason why I thought it was an interesting article is the news cycle in general seems to be accelerating with tech embroidered into a number of larger stories that are impacting people's lives on a regular basis. And I don't see that cycle slowing down. I actually can see it increasing, which is quite amazing. Also, personally, I'm kind of revolted at the hypocrisy of Silicon Valley and some of the large players in it. I personally rather deal with an honest rogue than a so-called liberal that or some organization that kind of comes out with statements that are obviously not realistic and not in their culture really. I find it rather personally nauseating, but that's me. What do you reckon, John?
Well, it's very interesting because I think that the problem is not really a ethics in tech problem. It's a ethics in humanity problem, where we start with the end, which is make money, and then whatever means is necessary to get there are justified as long as we get there. And when we're talking about the bridge of ethics, like what kind of person am I going to become? I'm rich, bitch. You know what I mean? I mean, there's, when Morton addresses this, there's like there's a veneer of ethics such as don't be evil, or, but it.
Oh, we got somebody on the panel that knows about evil.
Yeah. But I mean, it really doesn't mean anything if you don't have some sort of code. Everybody has some sort of code that they live by, whether it's do unto others as they do unto you, or do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And there's a world of difference between those two statements. But I think the idea is, if you're building a product that's going to be used by a ton of people on the web, I think you need to ask yourself this question. Are you okay with having total transparency if users know exactly how you're doing stuff in the background, what things you're collecting, how you're using your data, how you run your company, and how you make your decisions about how you're building your product to either benefit or use the customer. And a great example here, it's like, oh, we can't use ad revenue, so let's use crypto jacking as a revenue model instead. Something's really broken, like when that's what we're doing. So I'll toss it at him.
Well, it's very relevant to the WordPress ecosystem, really, because you have all these crippled plugins, don't you? And you install half of them, and it's not that clear where they are crippled when they're not crippled. And Morton's got his position that that whole model
is dark patterns.
I'm not so. I just think you need to be very clear what you're providing, what you're not providing.
First of all, every single one of the things that John just mentioned is actually addressed in that article. Like literally, absolutely every single one of them.
I've read it, but I'm going to have to read it.
Including the crypto jacking, which is the primary example at the top. But I think to put this in some perspective, if you look at, so yesterday, there was a memo leaked from Facebook. As everyone harps on Facebook right now. So there was a memo.
Can we actually link Facebook? Can we ever link Facebook with morals?
There's actually this interesting sub-conversation happening in Facebook right now, because the memo was like shared in the internal Facebook system, which is based on the same Facebook sharing system as everything else is. And then someone was like,
I've got their security settings a bit better set up.
Like, can you call it a leak if the actual system is built around sharing? But that's beside the point. So in this memo, which was written a couple of years ago, I think 2016, one of the executives at Facebook is talking about how the nature of Facebook is to connect people, and that is what drives the company. And when you read it in a very shallow way, it looks like manifesto that just states like, this is what Facebook does. And by connecting people, that trumps every other aspect of our business, and it's always good. But if you read it with a little more, like if you assume that the person writing it was being critical of the way that Facebook operates, you very quickly see that what he's trying to do is saying, look, if we approach this from a consequentialist perspective alone and look at it, then it is okay what we're doing, because we're just trying to connect as many people as possible. We're pulling all this data in to make connections with people and making sure that they get connected to all the people they might possibly know, and that justifies all our decisions. And then at the bottom of that thing, which is really short, and I can give Jonathan a post so that he can link to it that has the thing with some analysis on it. At the bottom, he starts talking about what are our values, and are these our values? And it doesn't go any further than that. And I think this is what I was trying to address with the article, that when we talk about decision-making in are in the tech space. What we're missing is a foundation of a foundational methodology for actually analyzing our decisions and what the outcomes are properly. If you look at other industries like engineering, for instance, so someone builds a bridge in Miami that falls down. Guess what? There are actual structures in place around engineering that will handle the situation. So when that happens, I personally know a structural engineer who said within minutes, she was looking at the pictures and he's like, okay, so these are the people who are going to get in trouble for this. These types of people will lose their jobs over this. This person will likely go to jail. Like there's an actual system in place to handle these types of situations. But when you come to tech, which has just as much impact as a structural engineer, if something goes wrong, say Facebook sells data to a company that ends up manipulating elections, there's no recourse. Nothing happens to Facebook except maybe people pull out and delete their accounts or maybe sell their stock, right? So there's no direct consequence. And so there's two aspects of it. One is that tech actually needs to have proper governance in it to avoid, to have some sort of recourse for the end users when companies do bad things, which is going to take a decade or 2 or 3 to roll out. But more importantly, each individual tech worker needs to build into their process a set of an ethical methodology, so that when a conversation like the one that happened at Facebook does happen, it goes beyond just saying, hey, here's the consequentialist breakdown of this, and I think we should be talking about virtues, but I don't really know what I'm doing. Because that conversation, that memo that was posted on Facebook, if you take that and you approach it with the methodology I lay out in the article, you'll actually be able to dig way deeper into it and come out with answers that make sense. So rather than just having a thing that says, I think this is a problem, but I don't really know what to do about it, you can break down why it's a problem, what needs to happen for that to be resolved, and which discussions need to happen to make sure that that they end up in the right place. And that's the purpose of this. The purpose of ethics is not to tell you what's right and wrong, is to give you the method and the tools to be able to judge your own actions before you make them.
Right, thank you for that. We've got another regular panelist join us. Adam, would you like to quickly introduce yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm assuming I sound okay. I haven't tested my audio. Okay, good. Thank you. Hi, guys. Yes.
Sounds glorious.
I'm working on it. Hey, everybody. My name is Adam from WPCrafter.com. I make WordPress tutorial videos for people, and I'm glad to jump on today. And I wanted to say on this conversation, actually, I didn't want to say anything, but now I actually kind of do. I think a lot of it boils down to like a simple thing that ethics and profitability typically aren't like two things that are in alignment. Ethics is actually kind of a strong word. There are times where there is issues of ethics, like as we see with Facebook and all that. But then when it's broken down into site design, it's a challenging thing. There's this disalignment with, for example, I think one of the main points of the article is putting the user first. Sometimes, we have to, it's hard, right? Do you put the user first in the most purest fashion, or do you say, well, I've got to keep the lights on so that I can put the user someplace? You know what I mean? There's this constant at odds. And I feel that even personally myself, I mean, I don't do pop-ups, but I do on my website do some things that definitely do not put the user first. Like when you come to my website, if you haven't been there, I have a little thing that pops up on the bottom, and we're actually forced by some of the regulations to not put the user first. I mean, it's kind of annoying having to pop up a cookie policy whenever someone comes to your website. That certainly doesn't the message might put the user first, but the interaction and the experience does it. Off to you, Martin.
Yeah, you're right. It's complicated.
It's complicated.
It's super complicated, but that's
it's very complicated. But it's a great discussion to have. That's why I appreciate you always putting these really challenging, thought-provoking arguments out there that no one else is really talking about. This is a perfect example of that. How many words is this article?
It's like 9,000. And that's the very heavily edited version. It's going to be a book. Like there's, I had long fights with the publishers about whether or not you can actually publish a 9,000 word article and people will read it, but they are. So I planted little pieces in it to make sure that when people comment on it, if they've read all the way to the bottom, they would say things, and then I can see that happening. So people are reading it, which, you know.
Yeah.
I absolutely want to read it from top to bottom. I'll say that I haven't, but I think this is one of those articles that I really will read from top to bottom and not skim.
Okay, I have to run. Yeah. I have another meeting. Sorry.
It's great seeing you, Bolton.
Okay. Have a good long weekend or short weekend or whatever you end up with.
He's got confused. In Europe, folks, it's Easter weekend, and especially in the UK, everybody drives enormous distances, which are nothing compared to North America, and they spend most of their time in traffic queues, getting very frustrated. Right. Before I'm going to go for, I knew this was going to be a big subject. We've got a few other topics to discuss, but I'm going to go for my break. But before I go for the break, I want to talk about our sponsor, and that's Intelligence WP. And what is Intelligence WP? It puts your Google Analytics in your dashboard of your WordPress website, and it provides enormous amounts of charts and information to your heart's content about who's coming to your website, and it makes it more visual and more understandable, your Google Analytics. And like I say, it puts it in your WordPress dashboard where you're going the most to. And it's not crippled. It's a powerful plugin. They provide paid packs where they will, if you've got specific tasks that you want to set up, like you've got a WooCommerce website and you want to set it up to monitor particular products, you can buy a pack and they'll help you set it all up for that particular task. So it's a pretty good deal. So go to Intelligence WP, and also give them a Twitter that you heard about them on WP-Tonic. That really gives them some joy, and joy is great, isn't it? So we're going to go for our break, and we'll be back with a load of other stories. See you soon, folks. We're coming back. We've had philosophy, ethics. It's been a bit highbrow, below, much above my pay scale, but there we go. On to the next story, and that's WordPress design and development pricing structure service survey results from Server Pilot. That's a title in its own way. But John, can you give a quick synopsis of what this story is about?
Yeah, definitely. So Server Pilot, they commissioned a survey in early 2018, and they got responses from 261 companies around the world, but 184 of those were from the US, the UK, Australia, the Netherlands, and Canada. So most of these are from our neck of the woods. So there was a couple of interesting things that I noticed. By far, the largest percentage of respondents, their company was founded in 2004 or earlier, 60%. And then the next, like most of them were, from 2012 to 2017. Something that was like very interesting, it popped out to me is most of the people are charging between $50 and $150 per hour. Though if you're a freelancer or you identify as a freelancer, you're more likely to charge, in that 50 to 75 range. And if you identify as an agency, you're more likely to charge in the 100 to 150 range. And in fact, I think it was like 2% of freelancers charge above $100 an hour, which is a little crazy to me. By far, more people were charging, or they were pricing projects by an hourly rate and very few people doing value pricing. A lot of people were doing like package pricing, to where it's like, this package is X, this package is Y, this package is Z. But a lot of people identifying as a full service digital agency. I think it was 22% identified as a full service digital agency. But then the majority of them said it was like, 2 people or less in their organization, which I found to be kind of contradictory. Very interesting survey. It shows like there is a little bit of stable growth in the WordPress ecosystem, not like explosive growth, just kind of, small growth. I think the most people are on the smaller end. Most of the people in the ecosystem are either smaller shops of 2 or 3 people, or they're freelancers. And that's really what I got out of this.
I think that was a great synopsis. Thank you so much, John, for that. I think that some of the things I got from it is exactly what you've just outlined. I also think I totally understand why this happens, and it's so easy to go down that, and in some ways you're forced down that, especially if you're doing direct work with clients, small businesses. Is that you say you can provide almost everything, and they, in some ways, they seem to want to demand it, or it's price driven. You say you can do SEO, you can do content development for them, you can build the website for them, you can host the website for them, you can do this, do that, do the other. And it is, in some ways, it's driven by the market, but in the other way, it's, I would say, I'm struggling now because I was going to utilize the word the wrong thing to do, but that's too strong, and that's not really realizing the reality of the market. I don't know if I'm dribbling here. What do you reckon, Chris? I think John did a good job, but I think I'm just dribbling. Am I dribbling, Chris?
I don't think so.
No.
Pricing is an interesting thing. I started out as a $30 an hour solo freelancer. I grew to an agency of 17 people, and we charged $200 an hour. And then we transitioned to becoming a product company. And my first website I charged $300 for. Later in the agency days, some of our projects were over 6 figures. And it's just, there's just so much that goes into that. And even with the high hourly rate, there's a lot of expenses and a lot of things that come out of that. And doing project-based pricing versus hourly, I always try to do project-based pricing. But, if there's a lot of obscurity, we would do the hourly pricing. And I had to a lot of times tell people that no to certain things, like we're not a systems administrator, like server DevOps. We're not SEO. We're not copywriters. These are, so it's about defining boundaries, but it is really easy, especially in the early days. As a freelancer, I'm guilty of, not in a bad way, but just doing whatever I could to keep the lights on, and learning. And I would study up, I would learn the best practices in SEO and do things for clients. But over time, we ended up, the more we focused, the better it got. In our agency days, we exclusively focused on membership sites and online course-based websites. And this is where Lifter LMS was born out of. But pricing is a very interesting and challenging thing for both the provider, the company, and the client who needs to buy into that.
Yeah. What do you reckon, Adam?
Well, see, what's the challenge with being a web developer or a freelance web developer is there's very little there's actually no barriers to entry, right? That is so a traditional brick and mortar business, you need to have money, and just by the fact that you have to have money and get a lease and all that kind of stuff, and it requires that capital investment. That's why you don't just have everyone going in and starting a brick and mortar type of business. There's this barrier to entry. making a website for someone today doesn't actually require any barrier to, there's like very next to no barrier to entry. You can get a WordPress that's free. You can get a theme that's free. You could get a page builder that's free, all these plugins that are free, and you could probably pull it off. That's, I think, why you see a lot of, when you're looking at the numbers, a lot of people, it's just one person or maybe two, which means husband and wife. And you don't see any revenue growth, because just because you raised your hand and said, I'm a web developer, doesn't mean that you know how to market yourself, build a brand, establish yourself as an expert in a particular niche. That's why you don't have revenue growth. Now, the exciting thing, though, that I take away from this is it's great if you are someone that wants to be a freelancer or morph into an agency, yet you do it with some strategy. You are figuring out how to differentiate yourself, build a brand, actually figure out a way to actually market yourself. You're that on the pay scale there, you're going to be the one that is having the massive growth, because you can easily clobber up all the business that you can handle. But the reason I think some of these numbers are what it is there's just these low barriers to entry. I do believe it's a great time to be a web developer. It's a great time to be a web designer. Everyone needs it, but you just need to.
You do think that, do you?
I absolutely do. I absolutely do, without a shadow of a doubt, because, you know, if you will take the time to not just make the website, but do the other 90% of the things that it takes to actually have a business, then the world is really your oyster. The world is really your oyster. You can get as much business as you want to get and make whatever revenue that you want to make and charge whatever you want to charge. But you just have to have some strategy. But that's the challenge too, right? I'm saying you need to do this, but it might not be in everybody's skill set to actually do that. And that's why you find yourself stuck making the 50,000 a year or maybe 100,000 a year, and, you know, kind of struggling through it, not knowing where your next paycheck's going to come and Christmas is coming up, because maybe you don't have that full wealth of skill sets to actually run a business, because it's not about making the WordPress site. It's about running a business. Attorneys, they go to law school, and what have they learned? Law. What do they try to do? Open a law firm. What do? They close a law firm and they join a law firm because they don't know how to run a law firm. They know how to be an attorney, and that's it. And that's why, you've got a lot of attorneys that are steeped in debt because they don't know how to run a business. As a rant. No,
I see where you come from, but it's also, it's supply and demand in the 80s, 90s, beginning of 2000s. If you didn't want to go into medicine and you came from a middle-class family in North America, you went into law because, there was big bucks in it. And, a lot of law schools started expanding their campuses, new law schools developed. Everybody piled into it. And then you had the Great Recession, and business lawyers weren't in such high demand, were they? So, you wonder about the future of a lot of these law universities and these courses, because there's just an oversupply of students, basically. But I've digressed there.
Well, let me say, if you're trying to make any linkage to the topic of web design and development, the difference with web design and development is it really should be tied to monthly maintenance and packages and monthly payments to services for people. It really should be tied to that. And also, if you're a web designer, get this in your head. The people you make a website for probably need a new one in 2 years. And the people that have a website might already need a new one. And this is going to be an ever revolving cycle. And they also need access to an expert that can help them, for example, with search engine optimization or conversion rate optimization or all of these things. Or, I got to migrate, backup, optimize, the services side of WordPress. So there's so much opportunity if you have strategy and you know how to present yourself in a way that people will say, no problem. I'm going to pay you $1,000 a month, but I'm potentially going to get $10,000 more per month in revenue. Where do I sign?
Yeah, kind of. I see it as a pipe, and pipe that's got corners in it, and the flow eases in one eye. The technology becomes easier to do something, but the blockage moves down somewhere, and there's always a need for a pipe cleaner.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's the way I see it.
There always will be. There always will be.
The problem just kind of moves around. The problem.
That's an age-old problem from manufacturing. The bottleneck will move as soon as you fix something. And oftentimes in today's world and business, the next solution is also an online, you might be able to solve with technology. That's why there's so much opportunity. Even when the bottleneck, even when you fix one hole, another one opens up.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks. I think we go on to the next story. And it's one I chose, and European, it's not the greatest title, European MPs are pushing for even more extreme link tax. I don't think this will fly, but the reason why I still put it in is there's been a lot of talk about cryptocurrency. You know, we've mentioned it already in the first half of the show about, you know, people kind of rogue developers or whatever, or plugins, whatever, and they're crypto mining utilizing your computer or whatever. But I really see there's been a lot of talk about cryptocurrency, but where I do see in the end where it might be a powerful tool is in people that produces content. At the present moment, obviously if you produce a lot of really quality content, there's benefits of building audience, getting recognition from Google. There's great benefits. But there's also, a lot of people produce a lot of really good content and then it's scraped, it's ripped off, and they don't get payment off people. I see the ability of technology through crypto currency, really micro payments, and being able to see where a piece is being utilized as a methodology where people will in the end get paid for the materials they produce. I don't know, any of you lot want to take up my little thing and about this article? What about you, John? Do you want to have a...
Yeah, I'm going to jump on this. And so correct me if I'm wrong, but basically what's happening is and this is in the UK or the EU, right?
Yeah.
So they're proposing a thing. They're saying we want truth in journalism. We want to support good journalism. And so they're proposing a law to where if you publish something and someone republishes it somewhere, you have to ask them for like compensation. Like you basically have to get paid for it. And their logic by this is saying that this will help sustain like real journalism and pay these little outlets. The problem is the smaller publishers and independent bloggers that are might be getting like linked to from aggregate sites or larger sites, they might just simply get delisted because the larger, say like the HuffPo of the EU, whatever that is, they just don't want to compensate all these little publishers. So that's basically the flaw in this plan.
Yeah, it's basically, what do you reckon, Adam?
Well, I think that, you know, the internet's been around for 25 years, and it hasn't really received that. Actually, it's probably been around a little longer than that. I'm just saying maybe when I first got my first computer 25 years ago, or 25. Yeah, I've had a computer. Man, I'm old, guys. I'm an old man. See, I got no hair. Anyways, the internet's largely been unregulated. I mean, we're in the infancy big time of the internet and the age of the internet. But this regulation that keeps coming out of the EU is nuts, right? Because they try to enforce it against the world. So you've got one part of the world trying to dictate the entire internet for the rest of the world, right? We've got cookie law shoved down our throat. Now we have GDPR, which should be a topic of a future episode because that is right around the bend. Here I am in the United States. My server's in the United States. And most of my traffic's in the United States. But now I got to do all these things for the GDPR because some government body in a foreign nation that doesn't even have legal jurisdiction over me says I have to. But I have to. I genuinely have to accommodate the European citizens. It's just, I think some of this things, it's going to be a bumpy road. Let's just put it this way. The more these Facebook scandals come out, it's going to be a very bumpy road ahead. You're going to have wacky things like this from people that think the internet's just a series of tubes. I'm sure some of you guys might know that from 10 years ago. Not just me. You're going to see lots of nutty things like this because right now the internet still is the wild, wild west. So it's almost like one of those you buckle in and just see what they come out with next. And it's going to come out of Europe. No offense to Europeans, but the EU is like really likes to do these things. But that being said, I'm not against the GDPR. I'm not against privacy rights, and I'm not against the rights of content creators and content owners. I just think the burden that some of these regulations are placing on it is going to be an extremely heavy burden.
Yeah, before I turn it over to Chris, I think Professor Armstrong, we spoke about his interview when he was talking about, he's commented quite heavily about this, and he pointed out when he was talking about Facebook is that these regulations ain't really going to come from North America because fundamentally there's these tech companies have too much influence, where in Europe the kind of influence they got is quite a lot less, i.e. their ability to manipulate the kind of influence they've got in with politicians in Europe is a bit less. So there's more benefit for the politician to come out with maybe policies that you see in this article. What do you reckon, Chris?
I reckon that information wants to be free, and that's what the internet is always trying to do. With technology, we try to give away as much as we can for free. That's how tech businesses are built. This podcast is free. That we're delivering this through, this is going to end up on YouTube, which is free. And, but there's these, I think it comes back to Morton's article, actually. What type of world do we want to live in? So I love the internet. I love the Wild West nature of it. It's almost like if we think about the telephone and phone companies and long distance calling and the fees and all that stuff, Skype came in and just totally disrupted that. Like, you can call anybody in the world for free. The world changed with the internet. And that's the power of the internet is not the information, it's the connection. But like Adam's saying, the content creator has certain rights. If you're going to share somebody's stuff, there's like whatever, like the appropriate excerpt amount, quote it, attribute it to the person. Of course, this doesn't always happen. If some piece of content is like paid or sponsored advertising, it needs to be clear that this is advertising. And, I think the fact that Google, I think it's really the role of the search engine. Google apparently gives you a higher value if you have a privacy policy and you've actually thought about these things and implemented that on your website. You have terms of conditions. So it's a balance, but at the end of the day, trying to put the lid on the free flowing of information is really hard. And it's just not worth politicizing. So, I think our governments around the world do need to, have laws and regulations around communication, but I think it needs to exist in such a way that it, appeals to their people as global citizens, not as, individual nations. Like, what do they call in China, or is it North Korea that has like the wall around the internet?
Both have, obviously North Korea is a small country compared to China, but, China's, by buying certain European technology and also developing their own has a very effective, to some extent, wall when it comes to, and I think, was it Facebook or Google? I think it was, I think some offices have closed, people have pulled out China because it is extremely, they are
Censored.
aggressive in censoring any kind of discussions or articles or anything that threatens the central power of the Chinese Communist Party. So it is. But they've managed to develop quite a robust economy, haven't they? Even with those restrictions, haven't they?
I just personally, from my opinion, I like information to be free and for the world's people to connect with each other. But content creators need to be respected, and advertising needs to be known as such.
Yeah, it's a contradiction. Life's a contradiction, isn't it? There we go. On to the next story. Call for speakers, WP-Campus. They're having a little meeting. I've got the website up. I was going to give them a shout out. Yep, here we go. It's in Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. And it's July the 12th and 14th. And they're calling for speakers, and all they're selling tickets. I think it's great that, I still think there's still a market for maybe some very specialized conferences around the Pacific. It's great news. I'm quite supportive for what they do. I cherry.
So when it says for higher learning, that's not referencing like educators. That's referencing people that want a higher learning of WordPress, correct?
I think that's a very good point. My interpretation of what the conference target audience is people involved in courses in higher education. Anybody that's or somebody like yourself, Adam, that is in the private sector, but you are in education, aren't you? So anybody that's got an interest about making in the private sector or in the public or a mixture of both, that's in the business of education, online, traditional, or a mixture of all, should consider maybe going to this conference because that's what it's fundamentally about. Would you agree with that, Chris?
Yeah, I do think they have a focus on the universities specifically and how WordPress is used like in multiple ways, like for teachers, for departments, for administration, for media. So, but I do think, the definition of higher ed is debatable, and a lot of these topics are of value to, other kinds of training and learning situations.
Would you, at some stage in the future, do you think your company would consider maybe running a conference around online courses and education or something?
Yeah, we've been talking about it for years. We call it Lifter Live. It doesn't exist yet, but I think I will probably run it at first virtually.
Yeah.
A lot of online course and membership site and teachers are really spread out all over the place. But I'd like to start with a virtual event.
Which is totally logical, isn't it? Because they do that themselves, don't they? With Campus, they got a virtual, and also they got this physical one, haven't they? Yeah. I thought I'd just give them a shout out because they're nice people. On to the next story. WP-Forms turned 2 years old. What's new and what's coming up? And I know the chief developer, who's also a joint owner, and it was just I know they got most of these installs will be the free version, but I just found it mind blowing that the 900,000 installs of this plugin and they entered a market that seemed very, very competitive. There seemed to be a lot of form plugins already, but they really identified that there was still a lot of traction there. And of course, they're part you know, they've got Opt-in Monster and the other plugins that they've got. They know what they're doing. But was you surprised how well they've done, Chris?
Not at all. Because the product is ubiquitous. Ubiquity, like forms are everywhere. Just like page builders can be used on almost every site. So if a product is in a niche that almost every website could benefit from, it's a huge, massive market. And then the question is just how do they differentiate? Like what makes WPForms different from the other 20 form options out there? And of course, they've got brilliant marketing and business leadership behind the product, the technology itself, which helps launch it into that kind of success. So I'm not surprised at all. I remember when it first came on the scene, it wasn't that long ago. And here they are about to cross 1 million. But it's a ubiquitous market. Almost every single website has a form on it.
And Adam, have you done any kind of videos on it or looked at their particular form builder?
Yeah, you know, I used an earlier version, so it's probably a bit different today than when I used it. The thing with while I'll say I'm also not surprised for a lot of the same reasons, but like let's compare this to say a WordPress page builder. So this is more in the conversation of there's established players. Can I come in and do this too? The difference between a form plugin and a page builder is I got to say, you're not really that passionate about your form plugin, right? So you're not locked into your form plugin. You're not tied or married or joined at the hip with your form plugin. So something better comes along, or maybe something that is automatically installed. Have you noticed that WPForms is actually automatically installed on Softaculous? Did I say that right? I always say that wrong. I used to say Soft Delicious, and then I'd get, I don't know where I came up with that, but it's Softaculous. That's that.
Oh, but your interpretation sounds even better.
I know, right? I mean, come on, let's have fun with this stuff, guys. But that's the ability to bring a product to a market where there's already established people. But it's not something where people are loyal to this or that. It's easy to swap out and change. And then with better marketing, probably a better product. But honestly, I don't get excited about a form plugin, right? Because they all kind of do the same thing in just a different way. I mean, no one's really revolutionized it, you know. Actually, Elementor has a form module so you can visually style your form. That's the biggest thing lacking with all these form builders is there's really no way to style it without doing a bunch of manual stuff. But they come in, you work a deal with Softaculous. So if anyone goes on their WordPress host and automatically installs WordPress, guess what you get? You get AskMet, Hello Dolly, and WPForms. And that's great. I mean, more power to them. Making deals like that gets you active installations. I'm not saying that's the secret to their success because it's not, but it's probably a contributing factor. But it more points to the fact that anyone that has strategy, connections, and some marketing prowess can go into any plugin or theme or niche or business and just go in there and become a dominant force.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think I'm going to wrap it up now because I'm trying to keep it to an hour because I've had some feedback that something goes on a bit too long. So I'm going to let the panel, first of all, John, how can people find out more about what you're up to, John?
Well, definitely you can find me at my website, which is lockdowndesign.com, and I'm either Lockdown or Lockdown Design everywhere. So,
yeah, that's great. And Adam, how can people find out more about you, Adam?
You can just Google WP Crafter, go to WPCrafter.com or YouTube.com/WPCrafter.
That's great. And Chris, how can people, the comfortable looking Chris, how can... And actually, your hi-fi has been a lot better this episode. Actually,
that's because I'm actually close to the router. I'm not broadcasting through the field, but thank you.
The field. How can people find out what you're up to, Chris?
I'm at lifterlms.com. I also have a podcast for course creators and membership site builders called LMS Cast. If you're watching this live, I've got an episode coming up with Jonathan and Adam. that were really good. So check that out. You can just go to LMS
Oh, you published
Cast.
it? I did that ages ago with you.
Yeah, those haven't gone live yet. Jonathan has had an episode a while back, but I've got a couple new ones coming out with the other two here today.
Yeah, that's great. So I've really enjoyed the discussion, folks. Like I say, you can watch this live on our Facebook page. Look for WP-Tonic Show, and every 8:30 Pacific Standard Time, every Friday. AM, that is. You can go to the page and watch us live. I think it's a great way. Obviously, listening, you get some of it, but I think you can see me laughing and pulling faces and acting very childishly. There you go. So if that's your entertainment, there we go. I thank the panel. I think it's been another great discussion. You never thought you listened to a WordPress podcast with a philosophy section, did you? There we go. You get everything on this show. We're here to entertain, aren't we? So we'll see you next week, folks. Thanks a lot. Bye.